When I saw the message that said, "Make sure it looks like an accident," I thought my heart had stopped. That single line, those few words glowing on my husband's phone screen, changed everything I thought I knew about love, safety, and marriage. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon, the kind where the world feels still, like nothing bad could possibly happen. The kind of day I used to love, the sound of the ceiling fan spinning, the smell of cardamom tea cooling beside me, and the faint hum of the washing machine in the background. I was folding laundry in our bedroom, a routine chore I'd done countless times before. My husband Daniel had left his phone charging on the dresser. He never used to leave it there. Daniel was always careful with his phone, too careful now that I think about it. But that day, he'd been in a rush to take a shower before heading out for his business dinner. When the screen lit up, I almost ignored it. But something, a strange feeling I can't quite name, made me glance over. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the quiet voice that lives inside every woman, the one that warns you when something's wrong before your mind catches up. The message preview read, "Make sure she's alone that night. The breaks will do the rest." At first I didn't understand. I thought maybe it was a joke, some dark, twisted conversation between his coworkers. But then another message came through from a contact saved as M. Work. "Don't worry, baby. Once she's gone, we can finally be together without looking over our shoulders." My breath caught in my throat. My hands went cold. I remember staring at those words, reading them again and again until they blurred. And then it hit me. They were talking about me. Daniel's phone buzzed again, but my body was frozen. My mind screamed at me to take a picture, to do something, anything, but I couldn't move. It was as if fear had tied invisible ropes around me. From the bathroom, I could hear Daniel humming softly, that same tune he always sang in the shower. For a second, it made my stomach turn. That voice, that melody had once made me feel safe. Now it sounded like the soundtrack to my own death sentence. I finally managed to take a shaky breath, picked up his phone, and scrolled up through the messages. There it was, days, maybe weeks of planning. Mentions of routes I took, times I usually drove, even a comment about how I never wear a seatbelt. They had been watching me. He had been watching me. I dropped the phone onto the bed as if it had burned me. My vision blurred, my knees trembled. I thought I might faint. That's when Daniel stepped out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, smiling like nothing was wrong. "You okay, honey?" he asked casually, drying his hair. I forced a smile. Or at least I think I did. My voice cracked when I replied, Yeah, just tired." He walked toward the dresser to grab his phone. I felt my pulse hammer in my ears. Every step he took closer felt like a countdown. When he reached for the phone, I looked away. I didn't want him to see the terror in my eyes. "You sure?" he asked, glancing at me briefly. "You look pale." "It's nothing," I murmured. "Maybe I need to eat something." He shrugged and smiled that same smile, the one that used to make me feel like the luckiest woman alive. "I'll bring dinner home. Don't wait up too long, okay?" And then, just like that, he kissed my forehead, grabbed his keys, and walked out. The moment the door closed, I collapsed onto the floor. I couldn't cry, and not yet. It was like my body was too shocked to process what had just happened. The man I shared my bed with, the man I trusted, was planning my death. Normal life. Set up. Beginning. Until that day, I thought Daniel and I were fine, not perfect. No marriage ever is, but comfortable. We'd been married for 12 years. We had our routines, Sunday morning breakfasts, movie nights on Fridays, long drives to the lake when the weather was kind. He worked as an insurance consultant. The irony of that doesn't escape me now. And I ran a small home bakery business. Our neighbors thought we were the perfect couple. The kind that smiled at each other across the garden and waved at kids riding bicycles. I met Daniel when I was 26 at my friend's engagement party. He was charming, confident, the kind of man who could make anyone feel like they were the only person in the room. I remember thinking, this is the man I'll grow old with, and for a long time, I believed that. Sure, he had his moods. He could be controlling sometimes, always wanting to know where I was, who I talked to. But he called it caring, and I told myself that's what love looked like. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was. The small things I ignored, the hidden bank accounts, the late nights at work, the way he flinched whenever I mentioned life insurance. Still, I loved him. Maybe too much. That night after he left, I sat at the kitchen table for hours, replaying every moment of our marriage. The first time he said, "I love you," the day we bought our house. The night we argued about money. Each memory twisted into something darker now. It felt like I was looking at my entire life through shattered glass. I wanted to call someone. My sister, my best friend, anyone. But I couldn't risk it. What if he was watching? What if he had people helping him? The messages mentioned someone else. Emma, who was she? A coworker, a lover. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak in the house made me jump. Every sound from outside made my heart race, and as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, one thought echoed in my mind. If I don't act fast, he'll make sure I never wake up again. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, but it didn't bring warmth. The house felt hollow, like the walls themselves knew the secret I was keeping. Daniel had already left for work by the time I got up. His coffee cup was in the sink, still half full, a thin ring of bitterness clinging to the edge. I stood there for a long time, staring at that cup, thinking about how easily a person could look ordinary while hiding the darkest of intentions. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my notebook, the one where I usually wrote down new cake recipes. But instead of sugar measurements and frosting notes, I wrote a date, June 11th, the day I discovered my husband wanted me dead. Then I wrote, "He's planning an accident. I need to survive this." That line became my anchor. I knew I had to be careful. If Daniel realized I'd seen his messages, he might act sooner. So I did what I'd always done. I played the part of the perfect wife. When he came home that evening, I smiled. I asked about his day. I laughed at his jokes, even when my stomach churned at the sound of his voice. He kissed my cheek and I fought the urge to flinch. "You look better today," he said, hanging his jacket. "I just needed rest," I replied softly. "You were right," he smiled, pleased, and I realized how easy it was for him to believe me. That night, as he showered, I took a picture of the text messages with my phone. My hands shook so badly the images came out blurry, but it was something, proof that I wasn't imagining things. Still, I needed more. I needed to understand why. The next few days, I watched him closely. Every word, every glance, every call. He started taking more late meetings than usual, sometimes not coming home until past midnight. I checked our joint bank account and froze when I saw 3 large withdrawals I didn't recognize. When I confronted him casually about one of them, he smiled and said, "Just business, sweetheart." Don't worry about it. But I couldn't stop worrying. I began looking into his things when he left. Pockets, drawers, his car. I hated myself for doing it, but fear was stronger than guilt. That's when I found her. A receipt from a boutique hotel tucked inside the glove compartment. 2 nights, 1 room, charged to his credit card. The name listed under guest was Melissa Ray. M. Work. My stomach dropped. Melissa was the woman I'd met twice before. Tall, blonde, always smiling. She worked in Daniel's office. She once brought a cake to our anniversary dinner. I had thanked her. I had hugged her. Now I could barely breathe thinking about her name. That evening, Daniel came home smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. I greeted him as if nothing was wrong. I even asked if he wanted dinner ready early. He nodded, distracted, scrolling through his phone. I noticed how he kept it angled away from me now. "You've been quiet lately," he said suddenly. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Just tired. Orders piling up at the bakery." He leaned over and kissed my forehead. "You work too hard," he murmured. "You need a break." The way he said it, slow, deliberate, made my skin crawl. A break. I could almost hear his words from the message echoing, "Make sure she's alone that night." That night, I couldn't sleep again. My mind was racing, full of questions and possibilities. What if I called the police? What if they didn't believe me? He hadn't done anything yet. And the texts could be deleted, denied, twisted. I needed evidence that couldn't be erased. So the next morning, I went to a small electronics shop and bought a voice recorder, the kind you can hide inside a purse or under a seat. I told the clerk I needed it for interviews for my baking blog. When Daniel came home that evening, I pretended everything was normal. But as he went to shower, I slipped the recorder under the passenger seat of his car. I prayed he wouldn't find it. For 3 days, I lived on edge. Each night I lay awake listening for the garage door, my pulse racing at every sound. I couldn't tell anyone, not yet. Not until I knew what I was dealing with. Then, on the 4th night, after he'd gone to sleep, I quietly went to the garage and retrieved the recorder. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I locked myself in the bathroom and pressed play, static. Then Daniel's voice. "She doesn't suspect a thing." A pause. A woman's voice, Melissa's. "Good. Once the brakes fail, it'll look like an accident. Her car's old anyway. No one will question it." I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop the sound that wanted to escape. A sob, a scream, I didn't even know. Daniel. "And you're sure your cousin can do it?" Melissa. "He's done worse. We'll give him cash." No trace. My body went cold. Daniel, laughing softly. "To new beginnings." Melissa. "To freedom." There was a clink of glasses. A kiss. And then silence. I stopped the recording and sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face. This wasn't just talk. This was real. They were planning everything, down to the smallest detail. But amid the fear, something shifted inside me. A small, quiet flame. Anger. He thought I was weak. That I would just die quietly, like a problem being erased. He had no idea who he was dealing with. The next morning, I packed a small overnight bag, just in case I needed to leave quickly. I hid it under the spare room bed. Then I made a copy of the audio file and stored it on a cloud drive. If something happened to me, I wanted someone to find it. That day, I also reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in months, my childhood friend, Laura, who worked as a journalist. I sent her a simple text. "I need to talk. Urgent. Can we meet somewhere private?" She replied within minutes. "Of course. Are you okay?" I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. "Not yet." That evening, as Daniel sat in the living room watching TV, laughing at something meaningless, I watched him from the kitchen. Every movement of his, every sound, felt foreign, like I was living with a stranger wearing my husband's face. But I smiled, pretending to be the same wife he thought he controlled, because now I had a plan of my own. Laura arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early. She always did. I saw her through the glass window, stirring her coffee absently, her expression tight with concern. I hadn't seen her in almost 2 years, not since she'd moved to the city to chase bigger stories. When I finally walked in, she stood and pulled me into a hug. "You look pale, May. What's going on?" I wanted to answer, but the moment I felt her arms around me, the dam broke. I started shaking. She guided me to the seat, her journalist's instinct already kicking in. "Okay," she said softly. "Start from the beginning," and I did. The messages, the recorder, the plan. Every horrifying detail that had kept me awake for nights. When I finished, she sat completely still, her eyes fixed on me. "May," she said finally, "you need to go to the police. Right now." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because if I'm wrong, if they think it's just a domestic dispute, he'll find out." "And if he finds out?" I couldn't finish. Laura leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Then we don't go straight to the police. We gather evidence first. I can help." Over the next week, we created a plan. Laura arranged for a small GPS tracker, something her newsroom used during investigations. I slipped it into Daniel's car one morning before he left for a client meeting. We also placed 2 hidden cameras, one in the living room clock, another near the garage. I told him I'd redecorated while he was out, and he didn't even notice. Meanwhile, I played my part perfectly. Smiling wife, loving spouse, baking his favorite meals while silently recording every word that left his mouth. But every time he touched me, every time he said, "I love you," I wanted to scream. 3 days later, Laura called me. "May, I tracked his car last night." He wasn't at the office. He drove to a warehouse outside town, registered under Melissa's cousin's name. My blood ran cold. "That's where they're planning it," I whispered. "Probably. I've contacted someone, a detective I trust. But we need one more solid piece before he can step in officially." "What kind of piece?" "Something showing Daniel himself giving the order." His voice, his face, something undeniable. The chance came sooner than I expected. One evening, Daniel was sitting on the patio, talking on his phone. I was washing dishes, pretending not to listen, but the sliding door was slightly open. "Yeah, she's driving to her sister's next weekend," he said quietly. "That's the day. Make sure the brakes are done before Friday." I gripped the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. He was setting the date. When he came inside, I smiled. "You're home early," I said, drying my hands. "Meeting got canceled." "Lucky me." He kissed me, his lips cold. "You really should take that trip next week." "You've earned it," I smiled back, matching his tone. "Maybe I will." Inside, I was already rewriting the ending he thought he controlled. That night, I told Laura everything. She arranged a meeting with Detective Harris, a calm, middle-aged man with the weary eyes of someone who'd seen too much. He listened to the recordings, read the transcripts, and didn't interrupt once. Finally, he looked up. "Mrs. Bennett, we'll handle this carefully. You'll need to act normal for a few more days while we set up a sting operation." "A sting?" "We'll let them go through with part of the plan, just enough to expose them. We'll have unmarked cars following you, and we'll record everything. But you must not break character. No one can know you've spoken to us." I swallowed hard. "I can do that." The next few days felt like living inside a movie. Every smile I gave Daniel, every dinner I cooked, was part of an act, one that could save my life. On Thursday night, he was particularly affectionate. He poured me wine, lit candles, played soft music. To anyone else, it would have looked like romance. But I saw the calculation in his eyes. "I'm glad you're taking the trip," he said. "You need to clear your head." "You're right," I said, sipping the wine I didn't trust. "I'll leave early Saturday morning." He smiled, that same smile from the day he proposed, only now it looked hollow, dangerous. Saturday came. The sky was gray, the air thick with humidity. I packed my bag, kissed him goodbye, and got into my car. The same car they planned to sabotage. What he didn't know was that the police had already swapped it with an identical one the night before. The damaged vehicle was in their custody, its brake lines already tested and tampered with. Unmarked cars waited 2 blocks away. Laura sat in one of them, wearing headphones, listening to the live wire I'd hidden in my necklace. As I drove off, Daniel called Melissa. "She's on her way," he said. "Tell your cousin to finish it." The words were caught live by the recording device. Within minutes, police units were on the move. I reached the checkpoint where they told me to stop. Within seconds, officers swarmed the warehouse where Melissa and her cousin were waiting. Daniel arrived soon after, expecting a phone call confirming my accident. Instead, he walked straight into handcuffs. The look on his face when he saw me standing there, alive, unbroken, was something I'll never forget. "May?" he whispered, disbelief turning to rage. "You set me up." "No," I said quietly. "You did." He was taken away as Melissa screamed, trying to blame him, but the evidence was too clear. The messages, the recordings, the GPS trail, all of it painted the truth. That night, I sat with Laura in her apartment, shaking but free. "You did it," she said softly. "No," I whispered. "I survived it. Outside, rain began to fall, washing the streets clean. I watched it through the window and let myself breathe for the first time in weeks. Then I took out my notebook, the same one that had once held recipes and fear, and wrote a new line beneath the old ones. June 18th, the day I chose to live. The weeks that followed felt like waking up from a nightmare I didn't know I'd survived. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards in my quiet house reminded me of what almost happened there. People called me brave. The detectives called me smart, but I didn't feel like either. I just felt empty. Daniel was behind bars. The trial was fast, the evidence undeniable. The jury didn't even look at him after the recordings were played in court, his calm, cold voice detailing how and when I would accidentally die. He showed no remorse. Not even once. He sat there in that gray suit, hands folded as if he was attending a business meeting, not his own reckoning. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, I thought I'd feel relief. But instead I felt tears I couldn't stop. Because no matter what he'd done, this was the man I had once loved. The man I had cooked for, prayed for, dreamed beside. It wasn't victory I felt. It was loss. After the sentencing, Laura took me out to the lake, the one Daniel and I used to visit in our early days. The water shimmered beneath a pale sunset, and the air smelled of pine and salt. "You can breathe now," she said gently. "Can I?" I whispered. Because sometimes I still wake up and think he's next to me. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She just held my hand. For the first time in months, I let silence fill the space without fear. I realized that peace doesn't come when justice is done. It comes when you finally stop reliving the moment you almost died. I sold the house a few weeks later. Too many ghosts lived there. Ghosts of laughter, of betrayal, of a love that had turned into a weapon. I moved into a small apartment near the coast, where the mornings smelled of sea and freedom. At first, I didn't know what to do with myself. I'd spent years being Daniel's wife. His schedule dictated mine. His moods shaped my days. Now I had to rediscover what I liked, what I believed, who I was. So, I started small. I bought a journal, a fresh one. No recipes, no recordings. Just words. My words. Every morning I wrote a little. Sometimes about grief, sometimes about the ocean. Sometimes about how healing felt like learning to breathe underwater. Slow, strange, but possible. I also began volunteering at a women's shelter nearby. The first day I walked in, a woman with a bruised cheek looked at me and said, "You're the one from the news." I nodded. She asked, "How did you get out?" I told her the truth. By remembering that fear doesn't have to be forever. Months passed. The nightmares came less often. The trembling stopped. I began to laugh again, softly at first, then fully, loudly, without guilt. Laura still visited often. She said the newsroom wanted to run my story as a feature, but I refused. I didn't want fame. I wanted quiet. Then one morning I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in a hand I knew too well. Daniel's. My hands shook as I opened it. "May," it began. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to read this. I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry. Not for what happened to me, but for what I became. I was a man who thought love was ownership. You taught me too late that it isn't." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I didn't forgive him, but I didn't hate him either. Hate keeps the past alive. I'd already buried it. 1 year later, I stood on the same coastal road where my life was supposed to end. The wind was strong, whipping my hair around my face. I looked at the curve ahead, the one they'd chosen for my accident. It was beautiful, really. The sea glittered beside it like nothing bad had ever happened there. I smiled. "You didn't win," I whispered to the wind. "I'm still here." Then I turned around and walked back to my car, alive, unbroken, reborn. When I tell people my story now, I don't tell it with anger. I tell it with a calm that surprises even me. Because survival isn't just about escaping death. It's about refusing to let fear define what's left of your life. So if you're listening, if you've ever looked at someone you love and felt afraid, please, listen to that voice inside you. The one that whispers something isn't right. You don't have to wait until it's too late. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be brave once, just once, and it might save your life. Freedom didn't look the way I imagined it would. I thought that once Daniel was gone, my life would slip back into something peaceful, like rewinding to the woman I used to be before the lies, before the fear. But the truth is, when someone tries to erase you, even survival feels heavy. Every morning, I woke up with sunlight in my room and shadows in my heart. People in town treated me differently. Some with pity, some with awe. At the grocery store, whispers followed me down the aisles. "That's her," someone murmured once, the wife who caught her husband plotting her murder. They said it like I was a headline. Not a person. Sometimes I wanted to scream, "I wasn't brave. I was scared out of my mind." But instead I smiled politely and kept walking. Because I knew people didn't mean harm. They were just trying to understand what couldn't be understood. One afternoon I received a call from Detective Harris. "Mrs. Lane, I thought you should know," he said, his voice calm as always. "Daniel's lawyer filed for an appeal, but it's unlikely to go anywhere." I felt my heart tighten, not in fear, but in something colder. "He still thinks he can talk his way out of this?" I asked quietly. "He always did," Harris replied. "But don't worry, we're on it. He won't come near you." That night I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the sound of the ocean outside my window. I realized that my fear wasn't about him coming back. It was about him still existing, somewhere out there, breathing the same air, remembering me not as his wife, but as his unfinished plan. To clear my mind, I began therapy. My counselor, Dr. Evelyn Marsh, was an older woman with soft eyes and a voice that sounded like calm water. The first time we met, she said, "May, trauma is not just what happened to you. It's what keeps happening inside you." Her words hit me like a truth I'd been avoiding. Over the next few weeks, I learned to face things I hadn't spoken aloud, the guilt for not seeing the signs sooner, the confusion of loving a man who'd wanted me gone, the loneliness of surviving something no one could fully understand. One day, she asked me, "If you could say one thing to Daniel, not as your husband, but as a man who hurt you, what would it be?" I thought for a long moment before answering. I'd tell him I forgive him for being broken, but I'll never forgive him for trying to break me too. She smiled softly. "That's not weakness, May. That's freedom." A few weeks later, I found myself standing outside the courthouse again. This time not for testimony, but for closure. The state had finalized the asset division. The house, the cars, everything he'd once controlled was gone. His accounts were frozen. His name erased from mine. I signed the final document, my hand steady. Walking out into the cold air, I realized something important. I no longer belonged to the story he tried to write. I was writing my own now. That night, I cooked dinner for Laura, pasta, her favorite. We sat by the window, watching the city lights. "You know," she said between bites, "you could write a book about this." "Help other women," I laughed softly. "A book about nearly dying?" "No," she said gently. "About surviving. About how you didn't let fear own you." The idea lingered in my mind long after she left. Maybe, just maybe, my pain could mean something. Not just for me, but for someone else trapped in their own quiet nightmare. Before bed, I opened my journal again. I wrote a single line that felt like a promise to myself. I'm not a victim anymore. I'm the proof that darkness can be survived. As I closed the book, I looked out at the sea through my window. The moon reflected on the waves, soft, steady, endless, and for the first time I didn't feel small. I felt alive. A year after everything, I barely recognized the woman I had become. Not because I looked different, but because I felt different. The fear that once lived in every heartbeat had turned into something else. Something steadier. Purpose. My mornings began the same way now. Coffee by the window. journal open, the oceans whisper in the distance. But instead of writing about pain, I started writing about strength. Each entry was a letter to the woman I used to be, the one who thought love meant endurance, silence, and sacrifice. She didn't know better. But now I did. It was Laura who first suggested turning my journal into a podcast. "You already talk like you're telling stories," she said, smiling. "And women need to hear this, in your voice." I laughed. Who would listen to me rambling about trauma? "Thousands," she replied. "Maybe millions. You just don't know it yet." The idea terrified me at first. Speaking out meant opening wounds I had spent months trying to close. But it also meant taking control of the narrative that Daniel had tried to end for me. So one quiet Sunday, I recorded my first episode. It wasn't perfect. My voice trembled. I cried halfway through, but I didn't edit any of it out. Because I wanted it raw, real, just like the truth that saved me. I titled it, "When Love Tries to Kill You." To my surprise, within a week, the episode had thousands of listens. Messages poured in from women, strangers who felt like sisters. "You spoke what I couldn't say out loud." "Your story saved me from going back to him." "I thought I was alone until I heard you." Every message reminded me of one thing: survival has a ripple effect. One woman's courage can awaken another's. I began recording weekly, each episode a new chapter, not just of my story, but of recovery, forgiveness, and rediscovering life. Soon, I wasn't just surviving. I was helping others do the same. One afternoon, while preparing for a recording, I received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "Victim Support Conference, Keynote Invitation." At first, I thought it was spam. But when I opened it, I realized it was real. The director of a national survivor advocacy group had heard my podcast. They wanted me to share my story at their annual event, in front of hundreds of women, therapists, and law enforcement officers. My first instinct was to decline. I wasn't a speaker. I was just me. But then I remembered the trembling woman who once hid in her bedroom, praying for morning light. If she could survive that, I could do this. The night of the conference, I stood backstage clutching my notes. My palms were damp, my throat tight. Then I heard them call my name. "Please welcome Mae Lane, survivor, advocate, and voice of truth." The applause was soft at first, then louder, warmer. As I stepped onto the stage, the light hit my face, and for a brief second I saw my reflection on the big screen. Not the broken woman Daniel tried to destroy, but the one who rose from it. I began to speak, slowly, from the heart. A year ago, I found messages on my husband's phone planning my death. Tonight, I stand before you alive, not because I was lucky, but because I finally chose to believe my instincts. You could hear a pin drop. I told them everything, not just the fear, but the shame, the silence, the moments I almost gave up. I talked about forgiveness, not as a gift to him, but as a release for me. When I finished, the audience rose in quiet applause. Many were crying. Some just nodded as if saying, "I understand." It wasn't a victory speech. It was a goodbye to the woman who had once believed she couldn't speak. After the event, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been older than 22. "I left him," she said softly. "After hearing your podcast, I left him." Her voice broke on the last word, and I felt tears sting my eyes. I hugged her, whispering, "You did the hardest part. You chose yourself." In that moment, I realized Daniel didn't win. Not just because I lived, but because I turned what he meant to destroy me into something that saved others. That night, I went home, sat by the ocean again, and closed my eyes. The waves crashed against the shore. The same rhythm that once haunted me now felt like applause from the universe. I whispered to the wind, "Thank you for ending the life I thought I wanted, so I could find the one I was meant to live." The ocean has a rhythm, one that teaches you about life if you sit long enough to listen. The waves crash, retreat, and return again. They never stop. They never surrender. That's how I began to see myself. 2 years have passed now since that night I opened Daniel's phone. 2 years since the moment my world collapsed. And strangely, that collapse became the foundation of something stronger. I still live near the coast. My apartment is small, quiet, filled with light. The walls are painted the color of morning clouds, and there's a vase of fresh lilies by the window. Always lilies, because Daniel once told me they looked like funeral flowers. Now, they look like peace. Every morning I walk along the shoreline with my coffee. Sometimes I think about what I lost, but more often, I think about what I gained. Self-respect, freedom, and the kind of calm that no one can buy or break. The podcast has grown beyond anything I ever imagined. What started as a whisper has turned into a community. Thousands of women sharing, healing, standing up. We call it the second sunrise. Each week I tell a story, not just mine anymore, but stories of other women who've rebuilt their lives from ashes. Some stories end in tears, some in laughter. But all of them end in strength. A few months ago I received another letter from Daniel. This time it was different, shorter, almost uncertain. "May," it read, "I heard your voice on the radio. You sound free. I don't expect you to reply. I just wanted you to know. I listen." I folded the letter and burned it. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need his shadow in my light anymore. I let the ashes drift out the window into the sea breeze. It felt symbolic, like releasing a ghost. One Sunday morning, Laura came over with breakfast. She laughed as she placed a bag on my table. "You've changed, May. You used to make everyone else's plate before your own." I smiled. "I guess I finally learned to eat while it's warm." We both laughed, the kind of laughter that feels like sunlight in the chest. Then she looked at me with that serious glint in her eye. "You ever think about loving again?" Her question made me pause. I hadn't, not really. The idea of opening that door again scared me. "Maybe one day," I said softly. "But this time I'll make sure love doesn't mean losing myself," she nodded. "That's the right kind of love, May. The one that doesn't ask you to disappear." That night, as I sat on my balcony, I thought about what love really meant. Not flowers or promises. Not forever or perfection. Just safety, peace, respect. And maybe someday I'd find that again. But for now, I already had something better. Me. One evening, while recording a new episode, I decided to share something I hadn't before. Not about Daniel, but about the healing that followed. I spoke into the microphone, my voice steady and warm. "People often ask me how I found the strength to survive," I said. "But strength isn't something you find. It's what's left when everything else is gone. When love leaves, when trust breaks, when safety disappears, what's left is you. And that's enough." I paused, letting silence fill the space. "If you're listening tonight," I continued, "and you're trapped in a story that scares you, remember, endings can be beautiful too. Because sometimes the end is just the truth setting you free." After I finished recording, I sat there quietly, tears slipping down my face. Not from sadness, but from gratitude. Gratitude for still being here, for still being able to feel, for every heartbeat I wasn't supposed to have. The next morning I uploaded the episode. It became one of the most shared stories I'd ever told. Messages poured in again. Stories of women who found courage to leave, to heal, to live. And that's when I realized my life's purpose wasn't just to survive. It was to help others see that they could too. One evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, I stood barefoot on the sand. The wind wrapped around me, soft and familiar. I whispered a prayer, not for Daniel, not for justice, but for peace. For every woman who's ever looked at love and found fear instead. The tide came in, kissed my feet, and carried my words away. I smiled. Because that's what life does. It carries us forward, even when we think we're too broken to move. When people ask me now what happened, I tell them the truth. Not the story of a murder that never happened, but the story of a woman who learned how to live again. And if you've listened this far, maybe you needed to hear that too. That was my story, not of death, but of rebirth. Would you have found the courage to leave before it was too late? Tell me in the comments below. And if my story reached your heart, share it. Because one voice can save another,